Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
Gin, smokable stimulants, and sleep deprivation, the perfect ingredients in a recipe for disaster, especially when the pot they're brewing in is a mentally ill squatter that likes to wave around big sticks when he's mad. The man described as Darrell, my dad's old high school buddy, the 40-something-year-old antagonist of one of my life's more traumatic events, which took place back in 2015. It was a warm, fragrant springtime afternoon, and I was an 18-year-old kid coming home from a day of class at the local community college, coming home to my dad's anarchist trap house that my friend and I decided to move into as roommates a year before. It was a small, one-story downtown house in an upscale neighborhood, and it had 5 to 7 vagabond guests or couch surfers at any given time. That's up to 10 people under one roof, or 2 if you count the shed. Conflict was inevitable. I entered in through the side gate, from the well-manicured, street-facing front into the neglected, junk-filled back. There he was, sitting at his crooked, worn-out metal table placed right in my path to the bent-up screen door. Darrell was dressed in his finest filthy, brown jacket as he carved his latest piece of stick art. He looked up at me with glazed eyes and an absent expression. This struck me as odd, since, although he was weird, he wasn't usually this weird. When I looked closer at his table, I saw why. Along with his usual random pieces of metal and rocks he used for his wands, there was a blackened glass tube, a lighter, and a 4/5 empty gallon jug of rock gut gin. The gin I had watched him bring home with him the night before. The night before, he had been partying, having fun, and acting fairly normal, but the presence of the charred, straight-shot glass pipe on the table explained how he had stayed awake this whole time. I gave Darrell a modest greeting, to which he responded with an awkward head movement and unfriendly grunt as he continued to aggressively carve a stick. This body language gave me a dark vibe, full of animosity. What I experienced while walking it was unusual, but nothing too crazy to me. I had seen worse in that house, and had such a chip on my shoulder, I was almost itching for some kind of altercation to take my anger out on a daily basis. If this was my opportunity to protect my territory, I would do it with pleasure. I was a massive stoner and a bit of an alcoholic at the time, and upon arriving home, I usually would have stopped by my friend's room to say hi and smoke a bowl or two, but he was at his mom's house that night, which meant that, unfortunately, he was not able to witness the events that would be taking place over the following couple of hours. Although I had substance issues, I was still an honor roll student, so instead of smoking a bowl, I just went straight back to my room to get some economics homework done. I had worked for about 45 minutes before focusing became impossible due to loud noises and yelling coming from the kitchen, which was just beyond the hallway entrance, mere feet from my bedroom door. This was simply not something I would tolerate, so I grabbed my 2009 digital camera. I didn't have a smartphone, and made my way to the heart of the commotion. Holding my camera, I entered the kitchen to find my dad and his 2 tough biker friends huddled together near the sink. Darrell had, more or less, cornered the dent. His arms were outstretched, making his jacket appear like brown wings as he held up his largest stick in one hand, like Rafiki's staff in The Lion King. When I had walked in, I said nothing to alert him to my presence. I simply held up the camera to record him as he verbally spilled his darkest demons on all of us. He was belligerently screaming at my dad and his friends, but his biggest target was Joe, our lovable old biker dude who has been my dad's friend my whole life, and who never treated Darrell with anything but friendliness and respect. Darrell was screaming about how he was a racist, while Joe continued to deny it, raising his voice to match. While I can't speak for Joe's personal beliefs, I will emphasize that Darrell did not face any sort of discrimination under our roof. He may have felt disrespected at times, but his behavior was often unacceptable, and any confrontation was well deserved. During one of his loud, drunken, barely coherent rants, Darrell had begun hitting all the wooden cabinets with his stick, pairing his screaming with the crazed rhythms of a wild man. I continued to hold the camera out towards him, making no attempt to hide it or leave the room, all while he creeped his way towards me, whacking each cabinet along the way. You may see me as naive and crazy to do this, but I was filled with excitement. My desire to record him was mainly for evidence. He turned his head to face mine at an unnatural speed. His face squidged into a scowl as he laid eyes on me and my camera. With his rock gut gin breath, he got up in my face, waving his stick around in his hand as if to threaten me. "Get that camera out of my face, boy," he slurred. I cursed back at him in defiance and held firm as he tried to grab it from me. We wrestled back and forth from my green digital camera for about 10 seconds as it continued to record. Fortunately, I was able to get it back, and as I did, he moved to get close and intimidate me again, more aggressively now. Even though he was 10 inches taller than me, 18-year-old 18-year-old me had a tendency to be numb to situations like this, and my fear response had lessened with time. As he towered over me, my right hand rested around the closed lid of an empty cookie jar sitting on the kitchen table. At that moment I knew, if he got out of hand, that jar would be my last resort. I loosened my grip on the jar, pushed Darrell away, and watched him move back from me and make his way back to torment my dad and his friends again. I took this opportunity to put my camera back in my room, and came out a minute later to find that my dad and the biker dudes had gone to my dad's back room. Darrell had gone back to his dirty mattress in the dark shadows of the living room in the front of the house. Things had lulled, and I still had homework to do, so I went back to my room. After about a half hour, darkness had fallen outside, and things were too quiet. Something had to be wrong. I wanted to check on my dad and his friends, so I left my room and found myself alone in an eerie, grimy kitchen with the lights on and dark windows facing the night. There was a soft mumbling to my left. Darrell was kneeling in the dim rays of light, cast from the kitchen to the contrasting darkness of the living room. He was holding 2 billiard balls he had taken from the pool table, one in each upward facing hand, and outstretched arms. His head rolled back to face the ceiling in a perfect position to channel demons like an antenna. Like his head, his eyes were rolled back, with only the bloodshot whites being visible. As his head gently jerked around with his satanic mumbling, the dim light reflected off his bald scalp, shaven smooth with a razor. His unkempt salt and pepper goatee was specked with foamy dribble. Seconds after I saw him, he jolted into life like an animated corpse. His face contorted into a hatred I haven't seen before or since, as he lodged toward me from his kneel position, still holding the pool balls in each hand. Thinking quickly, I grabbed the cookie jar and, with Darrell close on my tail, retreated to my dad's room. Fortunately, the lights were on here as well, and the room had a door connecting to the backyard. He caught up to me there, so I pushed him back into a ragged wooden table in the corner, which broke under his weight. He quickly recovered, and sneered back at me as he bolted up from the wreckage. As he did so, I stumbled out the back door, tripped backward down the 2 concrete steps, and landed on the cement patio bordering the grass. Time had condensed in that moment, as all of this occurred in just a few seconds. When I landed, the cookie jar in my right hand had broken and I was bleeding heavily from a large gash on my palm, caused by the broken porcelain, but there was no pain. I wound up my pitching arm from my position on the ground, and as he was about to make his way through the back door, I launched the jagged remnants of the cookie jar, which still weighed at least a pound or 2, through the air. Lucky strike, the cookie jar crashed through the glass window in the back door and hit Darrell squarely on the forehead. He went limp and collapsed onto the floor of my dad's room. He didn't get up. It was his turn to bleed. Having faced this entire situation alone, I made my way to the shed to find my dad, his 60-year-old biker friend Joe, and Joe's other biker friend. I opened the shed door and there they were, all sitting in a close circle, whispering to each other. Tough men, cowering in this tiny one-room living space in the corner of the yard. These 3 grown men left 18-year-old me alone to fend for myself in a house with a violent psychopath. But I forgave them. They genuinely seemed terrified, and I was thanked profusely by all of them for solving their problem. I appreciated the ego boost, but we still had 2 problems. I was bleeding heavily, and Darrell was unconscious and bleeding twice as much as I was. I was advised to wrap my wounds, get in my car, and drive the 25 minutes to my grandma's house in the woods. I bled in my car all the way to grandma's house. When I was there, I soaked my wounds in soapy water, hoping to avoid getting stitches, since I still didn't know if I was considered a criminal or not, and wanted to lie low. About 20 minutes into soaking, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I had a feeling it was related to the event that had just taken place, and I was correct. It was a deputy from the sheriff's department. At the scene of the crime, I was quaking, but explained to her exactly what happened in complete honesty. Her response filled me with lightness like a helium balloon. It was self-defense, she had said, and Darrell was obviously blacked out and having a psychotic episode. According to the police, Darrell was found lying in a pool of blood on the front porch. A neighbor had called the police, and when they arrived, Darrell had woken up and begun to attack them, screaming about racism. Apparently, he believed the police were racist and there to harass him. He believed he was becoming a victim of racist police brutality and decided to attack the police before they attacked him. He attacked a female police officer too. Not cool. After learning that, I got back in the car to drive myself to the emergency room and continued to make a bloody mess of it for the whole 25-minute drive there. That night, I stayed over at my grandma's house. When I went back to my dad's house the next day, I learned a few details from my dad about what happened after I left. Darrell had bled so much that my dad and his friends were unable to absorb it faster than it was coming out, even after using all the towels in the house. It was at that point that they dragged him onto the front porch. They wanted to be done with him and let society deal with it. Darrell got treated at the hospital himself that night and spent the next 2 weeks in jail for disorderly conduct. I'm happy to say that he never came back to our house and I never saw him again. In a sense, my dad and his friends were right. I did still have a problem. The guy was a squatter and a menace, and now he was gone. This part, he was so messed up on drugs, he could hardly remember what happened. He thought it was Joe the biker who hit him. He has no memory of fighting with me. Now, 7 years later, this event still stands out to me in the story of my life. I learned a lot from spending a year living in an anarchist trap house, but the biggest thing I learned is to stand up for yourself and your territory, even when it makes people not like you, and to always watch out for tweakers when they drink cheap gin. For some context, I'm a 32-year-old female. This happened to me when I was about 25 or 26. I work full-time as a researcher at a university, which is where these encounters took place. I'm not a professor or anything, and because of my age at the time, I could have easily been mistaken for just another student wandering around campus. On some days, when the weather was nice, I would prefer to spend my lunch hour strolling around the university grounds outside, or sitting underneath a shady tree on a bench, enjoying the time I was not sitting in a cramped corner of the lab. On one of these days, I was sitting on a bench enjoying the fresh air, and a male student walking by asked if he could sit next to me. I'm a pretty shy and awkward kind of person, so even though I really would have preferred sitting alone, I said, sure. He initiated simple conversation, to which I obliged, but being careful not to be too forthcoming. He mentioned he had seen which departmental building I came and went from, which slightly alarmed me, given I had never seen this person before in my life. But I pushed the thought from my mind. After all, the weather had been decent lately, and I had spent nearly all my lunch hours for the past week outside. He asked if I was studying within the mentioned department, to which I told him that I was not a student, but rather I worked there. He told me he was an engineering student, and then followed up with asking me out to coffee sometime. I apologized, and told him that I had a boyfriend and would have to decline. We parted ways after that, and I assumed I probably wouldn't see him around again. About a week or two went by, and I was spending another lunch hour outside on campus, sitting on a different bench somewhere. Seemingly out of nowhere, the same man from before asked if he could sit next to me again. Admittedly, I don't remember what he started talking to me about at first. My mind was reeling, and I was rather uncomfortable having to potentially turn this guy down a second time. Sure enough, he asked me again if we could go out for coffee sometime. I apologized, and reminded him that I had a boyfriend and would not be meeting him for coffee. And again, he left after that. I was feeling rather anxious now, but it still hadn't reached a level where I felt I had to be too concerned. A few days later, I had finished work and was leaving the building to walk to where I had parked my car. The university charges a fortune for parking passes, even if you're employed by them, so I had always opted for free street parking about a 10-minute walk away from campus. My walking route would take me down several quiet residential streets with minimal car traffic. Even pedestrian traffic was pretty sparse on the busiest of days. It wasn't until I was about halfway to my car, down one of these quiet back streets, that I noticed someone walking directly across the street from me, but keeping a few paces behind. I noticed him from my peripheral vision and didn't want to flat out turn around to stare at him. It wasn't uncommon to see someone else by any means. I was just always trying to be aware of my surroundings by walking the streets alone. I had to make a few turns coming up anyways, and the chance that they would be going the same way as me was slim. But he did. He made all the turns I did, still walking on the sidewalk across from me, a few steps behind. I still did not want to look at whoever this was. I didn't want him to know that I was aware of what I thought he was doing. I quickened my pace to a speedy walk. I was approaching the first of two busier streets before I would reach my car. His pace quickened to keep up with me. That was the moment I panicked, the moment I was sure that he was indeed following me. After that, I started a full-out jog across the first of the busier streets. He ran to keep up behind me and was now on the same side of the street I was. I was now nearly at my car. I had to cross the last busy street and get about 100 meters and I would be there. But it was crossing the street that worried me. I often had to stop and wait a good minute or so before it was clear enough to do so. If this were the case, he would catch up with me, as if the stars aligned. As soon as I made it running to the busy street, I had a gap to cross. I booked it as fast as I could, finally turning around once I had made it to look and yell at the man who had been pursuing me. It was him. I could have suspected, but now it was confirmed. It was the engineering student whom I had turned down for coffee. Stop following me. I yelled at him from across the busy street. Can I just talk to you? He yelled back. I didn't even answer him. I mean, the answer should have been obvious from the start, and I was certainly never going to give my time to anyone who had just followed and then chased me for about 1 kilometer. I keep moving quickly to my car, so determined to get out of there that I didn't even care if he saw which car was mine. He had given up following me and never tried to cross the road to my relief. I got home and broke down. I mean, worse things had happened to other people, no doubt, and I was not harmed, fortunately, but I was shook. I had some anxieties walking to and from work after that. It wasn't long before a coworker and I would walk most of the distance back to our cars together after work. I'd I'd even changed where I started parking for a time. A few weeks had passed since the incident, and I had not seen him around campus at all. I had started spending my lunches in the lab instead of outside, but occasionally I would go to the student center to buy lunch instead. This one particular day, the food court in the student center was packed, almost shoulder to shoulder. I was standing in line at a burger stall, and I heard a guy try and get someone's attention through the crowd. I look up, and it's him again, waving to me and trying to make his way through the people. I panicked, and even though I'm terribly shy, I started a scene and yelled to him to leave me alone. His face dropped instantly as people stared at us, and he slinked back into the sea of students. My heart was pounding, and I was shaking. I don't even remember if I ended up getting food after that. I went back to work, and from then on, was even more focused on my surroundings than I ever was before. It's been 5 or 6 years since then now, and I still work at the university. I am so relieved to say I never saw him again after the food court, and haven't had any other harrowing accounts on campus. I am still diligent about being aware of my surroundings, especially when I have to walk to and from campus alone. I never asked the guy his name, so I couldn't even report an incident to campus police or anything. All in all, I'm just glad I never saw him again, and I can only hope he never did this to any other girl before or after me. I was 17 when this story happened 3 years ago now. I was working at an old pizza shop right on the edge of my town. For context, the town I was in is an affluent, suburban town surrounded by a bypass which loops around the town. Around my town is some farmland and main roads where all of the blue-collar workers moved to after the town was gentrified 10 to 15 years back. This pizza shop was around for 20 years and was very catered to these same blue-collar workers. It's around 9 at night and a call comes in for 2 pizzas and a 2-liter of soda. I'm the only driver in, so I have to take the delivery out. It's about a 10-minute drive to get to the location. There I have to drive up a long, gravel driveway that took 5 minutes to get up. My car really couldn't handle the gravel and how rough it was. Arriving at the place, I see a nice house and 2 barns plotted across the land with weak 5 to 6 feet tall surrounding the whole property. I've always been really anxious around farms because of how creepy I think they are. Being at this place when I felt truly all alone really started to make my anxiety flare. I decided to call the number on the order because I have no idea where this guy wants me to go and drop off his food. After about another 5 minutes of absolute silence, the man picks up. He had a very deep and raspy voice, like he's been a career smoker, which didn't do anything to help me feel better. I was told to meet him at his truck at the far barn on his property. I am now properly pooping myself as my mind races of all of the worst possible things that could happen to me. I pull myself together and muster further into this guy's property. I see the man's truck as I round one of those cylinder storage units where I see his truck and him inside. Instead of getting out, I call him and ask him how we should do the transaction. In that same deep voice, he instructs me to get out of my car and put all of the food onto his truck bed. Since he paid with his credit card already, I thought this would have been over in 10 seconds. I do what he tells me to do and walk over to the passenger window so that he can sign his receipt. The man looks to be around in his middle 40s, heavy set, with a scraggly black beard and a trucker hat. I'm a pretty skinny guy, so with my mind already racing on the being kidnapped or murdered, I really don't feel safe around this guy. I ask him if he has a pen on him because I forgot to bring one. I was pretty bad at my job and he did not have any cash on him. He stares at me with these cold eyes and points into the back of his truck saying to me, if you ask me for a tip, I'm going to be sticking this tip down your throat, where he has a double barrel shotgun just in the back of his car. I'm frozen in fear as I'm registering that this man has just threatened to kill me. Not only that, but this is the second time this has happened this shift. Yeah, I kid you not. The first time was because I messed up the address for a house and a man in his 60s wearing a cowboy hat comes outside and says he has the right to shoot trespassers when I was just trying to see if I was at the right house. The only thing I can muster out is okay, and I get back into my car and I get out of that farm. I was going so fast that I screwed up my car from my car bouncing around on that gravel path. I go 80 all the way back to the pizza parlor where I tell my coworkers what happened. None of my coworkers took me seriously and just thought I was playing this up for a joke. I go home and forget about it pretty quickly, but a year later I'm working the lunch shift and the same man calls in and orders a pizza. Now at this point I am refusing to take this order, but this was during the pandemic and the place was on its last legs already, so management forced me to go in anyways. It was only 1 or 2 in the afternoon on a Sunday, so at least my fear of the dark would be covered. I get there and the man is waiting for me at his actual house. He recognized me and out of all things started apologizing to me for what he said. He was excusing it, saying that he just started going through a divorce and was struggling with his emotions. I just wanted the whole thing to be over with, and he gave me $60 for what happened. Still, to the man on the farm, I hope we never meet again. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. So I'm of the mindset that everyone should know a little bit about cars. I've always been mechanically inclined, and I think that may have saved me. I was using dating apps a few years ago, met this guy, he seemed super nice. We talked for a few weeks before I was willing to meet with him. His dad owned a local gun store where I would go get my target stuff. I used to be in a woman's league for competition shooting, so I had seen this guy around and had a decent impression of him, but wanted to be safe. He invited me to a concert at a local town site. It was a concert I really wanted to go to, and I figured it would be safe since it was at a well-known place with a lot of security. I let him pick me up because he had talked about mechanics and cars and he wanted to show me his Mustang. He bragged about how well he kept it running and how he babied it. I was into time trial racing at the time, so I was interested to see what he had done. He picks me up and we start heading to the event. Right before the exit, he says his car is acting funny. I was watching the dash, and if you've been in racing, you know our cars and trucks usually have extra accessories. Whether it's aftermarket racks and gauges or switches, there's usually something aftermarket inside the car. There was nothing extra. The car felt like it was shifting correctly. There was no shudder or noise, nothing to indicate any problems. I was like, that's weird, and all I said was we should try and limp it to the concert venue. It's less than a mile away, and it's better than being stuck on Interstate 15. He agrees and drives us very carefully the last mile. We get to the concert, and things were okay. He kept watching me and buying me drinks. I refused to drink, so every time he gave me what I would make up an excuse and go to the bathroom and flush it. He kept making comments about how well I was handling my alcohol. I was super uncomfortable. The concert ends and it's time to leave. For context, this concert happened at the local reservation town site, and at the time the res did not have great cell service, so I couldn't get a hold of anyone to come get me. I decided to bite the bullet, and I talked him into taking the old highway instead of the 15. It sounds silly, but when you take the old highway, even though it's slower, people are more willing to stop and help you than they are on the freeway. I figured if he was having car troubles it would be safer, and we wouldn't have people flying by us at 80 miles per hour. We make it halfway between the town site and our town, and he says the car is acting funny again and pulls over. I'm stone cold sober and didn't notice anything wrong, so when I get out of the car to check it out with him, he starts making comments about how I'm drunk and I should wait in the car, and that it's safer because you can't trust drunk Indians, especially with a little girl like you. This dude had no idea that I'm actually native, and I just had an albinism. The hair on the back of my neck are standing up, so I checked my phone. I just barely have service and start texting my dad. As I'm walking away from the engine compartment, I noticed he was watching me, so I started acting like I was trying to get self-service to get help. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched this man take the spark plug wires off the distributor cap and switch the order. Your spark plug wires connect to the distributor cap based on the order your cylinders fire in, so doing that will either make the car run terrible or not even turn on. I managed to send my dad a picture of what he's doing, and my dad tells me to start walking. As I go to walk away, this guy gets back in the car and opens his glove box, which exposes a pistol he had. He tells me not to worry and we will be safe. I probably broke a world record for how fast I was texting my dad. He says to start walking and tell the guy that he is on his way and that our friends live up the road. So I do. I start walking with a purpose and take off as quick as I can. The guy is yelling after me, and I yell back, the wind is too loud and I can't hear you. I'll be back with our friends. I'm scared out of my mind. We are 10 miles out of town with no one around. The closest road actually leads to a cemetery, so there is really no one here to help me. I get a really bad feeling the farther I get from the car, so I turn around and look. The hood is closed. His lights are on, so I decide to hide in the farm irrigation next to the road. I keep walking towards town and text my dad what's happening. I hear a car slowly coming up behind me and see a flashlight, so I press against the side of the ditch and wait for it to pass. Once I can't hear it anymore, I crawl out and just kind of keep walking along the weeds. My dad texts me that he sees me, so when he pulls up I run to the truck. As we make it towards town, we pass the dude, and he's got like 3 cop cars around him. My dad tells me not to worry about what happened. I heard through the grapevine later on he had been charged with violent crimes in the past, and that he had been arrested that night for concealed carry without a permit. The police never talked to me, but I haven't seen that guy in town since. If I didn't have experience with cars and didn't know what he was doing, I could have been dead in that ditch instead of hiding. Most communities have where you can take basic car care and maintenance courses. I highly recommend everyone takes them and at least know the basics. This dude knew I knew cars, but his whole goal was to get me so drunk I wouldn't realize what was happening. So let's not meet again, fake car troubles guy. I got a new job, and at my job, there was this guy who used to watch me whenever he was around. We didn't work together, but we worked in the same department. We did sometimes work together, but it was rarely. All the weird stuff started a few months after I started a new job and moved within walking distance to my new job. One October night, I was walking home when a tall man wearing a hoodie came suddenly out of some bushes as I was walking by. I found this bizarre, so before I entered my apartment, I looked back and saw him standing by some trees watching me. When he realized I saw him, he jumped behind the trees to hide. I told my boyfriend and he thought it was drug dealer. Anyway, I started walking through a different trail when a month later, I saw the same man. This time he was crouching by the trailer of some parking lot. He got up and started walking away from me but kept watching me. After a week, he showed up again, but this time I was halfway to my home and he came out of hiding behind the trailer and started walking towards me. I beelined from my apartment's door and ran inside. This time he knew that I lived in which apartment, as the previous times I would walk around the front door so that he wouldn't know which apartment I was in. He seemed like he was trying to figure out where I lived, as he could have attacked me multiple times. It doesn't end there. I got laid off and got a new job. After 3 weeks of working there, I was getting on the bus when this guy who looked similar to the guy in the parking lot was watching me get on. I quickly hurried to the back of the bus. When we got to my stop, he pulled the string and got off. I got off as well, but then decided to wait for this guy to keep walking, but unfortunately he slowed down his pace, seemingly waiting for me to pass him. I ended up walking behind him until we got to some lights and he wouldn't move. I decided to walk fast and hide from him in case he was looking for my new job's location. During the time I worked there, I saw my ex-coworker on the train when I was heading back from my interview. He saw me going in the same direction as him and started running. He ran pretty slowly, like he had a limp or something. It was kind of strange, but anyway, I also saw him hanging out the mall when I was there with my mom, but this doesn't really matter as it's a popular place. Anyway, I got laid off from this job due to the pandemic and had a month where I did not go outside much. After a month, I got a new job within walking distance. After 1 week, I was leaving work when there was a guy just watching me again, and he looked similar to the previous guy watching me when I was walking home. So I ran away and got to some lights and didn't see him. For a month and a bit, I didn't see anyone. One night it was relatively warm. I was closing close to midnight and was walking home when I saw a white car parked behind some store, seemingly out of view of any security cameras. I was suspicious of it as it had its headlights and it seemed like someone was sitting in there. I'm walking by it and keep looking over my shoulder at it until I decided it was probably safe. Anyway, not a second goes by and I get this feeling I should look behind me. I look and I see my ex-coworker walking towards me. I start running as fast as I could and the adrenal helped me get away. I didn't look back until I cleared some space between us and I didn't see him. Luckily, there were some men waiting for the bus at the end of the road, so I wasn't too worried he'd come running for me as I've seen him running. So a month goes by and I didn't see him, but I assumed he was on vacation as he showed up approximately a month later. Anyway, one night in early May, I was walking over to a grocery store to pick up some groceries I really needed after work as it was only 9 at night. So as I'm walking there, some guy wearing a hoodie comes up from behind me. He starts walking towards the bus terminal, but I guess he overheard my conversation to my boyfriend as I was telling my boyfriend that I was going to the grocery store to pick up some stuff and walking home. So I get to the grocery store and get my stuff. When I'm about to start walking home, I see some old looking guy dressed like a teenager standing outside of the grocery store. He was wearing the same clothes as the guy I saw earlier and he was watching me and trying to get close to me. I start telling my boyfriend to get me Uber instead and I walk over to some bags of fertilizer to hide from this guy, but he goes and starts looking for me. I stare at him, letting him know that I know he is up to something messed up. He stares back with these soulless eyes and luckily then my Uber showed up and I hopped in. I'm not sure if this guy has anything to do with my ex-coworker or if he was a random psycho, but I do know that it helped me look out and it ended up saving me as I made my boyfriend meet me after work. After that, I was extremely paranoid and always on the lookout for creeps and I made my boyfriend meet me after work if it was dark out. A few days later, after no bizarre events, my boyfriend comes and meets me when I see some car with its headlights on parked in front of a store we had to pass. We start walking by it when it slowly starts driving away, seemingly watching us walking away. We get to some lights and I see the same car now in another plaza driving slowly and watching us. Freaked out, I tell my boyfriend and he gets scared. I assumed it was my ex-coworker as the car this time looked like his mom's car. I saw his mom come to pick him up at work once and she was driving a car that looked like this one. The next night, we also saw some man with a black van with the passenger door wide open hovering around it. When we passed him, he started to follow us, so we started to run a bit until we got farther away. 10 minutes later, I saw some guy wearing a hoodie hiding behind some building with his back against the wall. I don't know if the last two incidents are related, but it sure terrified me and my boyfriend. Mind you, I used to walk home by myself for a month without incidents, so I'm assuming once it was warm out, whoever had been watching me was planning something terrifying, and after this, I changed my hours at work even though my managers gave me a hard time despite all the insane stuff I was seeing at night. I got my managers to give me rides home anytime I had to close or I would get Ubers, but I never walked again at midnight or after 10 at night even with my boyfriend. Anyway, I ended up seeing my ex-coworker's car multiple times in May when my managers drove me home. Eventually, I stopped seeing his car as he realized I would never be out again at midnight. Anyway, I started getting morning shifts at work and I finally don't close anymore at work. However, I don't know if I'm done being stalked or not. Last month, the sun was starting to set at around 9 at night. I was walking by myself to the grocery store when I saw my ex-coworker drive past me. I ignored it as I've seen him in this area and it's probably unrelated. Anyway, 30 minutes later as I'm walking back with my boyfriend had gone to a store so my ex-coworker might have thought I was alone. I see the guy who was watching me in the parking lot in the same parking lot. He's back and lurking around. He sees my boyfriend and me and starts walking away but keeping an eye on us until we get into our apartment. Unfortunately, due to having in-person classes at my university, I'm back to working until 10 at night. But I have my boyfriend meet anytime I do. I'm worried it's all going to start back up again. I'm genuinely scared to be honest as this has been going on for almost a year. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.